Much, Jerry, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. I've got some good news today, and perhaps some not quite so good news, which I'd like to share with you, but I'd like to talk about mostly the good news about what we can do about it. Our company, BetterCells, it's a new company. We set it up about a year and a half ago, and we've really only just started soft launching and going into revenue and business, if you like, in the last 6 weeks. We're really focused on what's a massive problem for all of us, and it's the healthcare crisis that's been growing for some years. In the US alone, it's a $2.2 trillion healthcare crisis market. In Australia, we spend about $180 billion a year on healthcare, and yet ironically, with 6% per annum growth thereabouts for the last 25 years, we're spending more money on healthcare, but we're actually getting sicker. So what we're doing is we've developed an online hub or an online platform where people who are seeking better health or trying to avoid chronic illness can talk to experts, talk to practitioners, get tests done, find out what's actually happening inside themselves, and then make decisions and better choices. So we're really about empowering individuals to ask the right questions in the first place, then get the right answers, and then get the right advice. So it's really about setting this business up for the benefit of everyone. Functional medicine is what we focused on, and functional medicine is really itself focused on chronic illness, lifestyle illness. It's the things that we eat, we drink, we're exposed to every day, which we absorb and retain. Some of it works for us, unfortunately, an increasing amount of that doesn't work for us with our Western diet. It's a globally scalable online platform, so from an investment point of view, I believe we do present some intriguing opportunities for investors. So it's really about a guide online to help you find your way to better health and a sustainable better health. We're also set it up so that you don't actually have to attend physical consults exclusively. You can actually do a lot of your health advice or receiving advice and guidance online. So what is chronic illness? Just to be clear, it's almost everything except for trauma. So chronic illness, cancer, cardiovascular heart, Parkinson's, autism, Alzheimer's, arthritis, autoimmune diseases, more people are becoming aware of that, epilepsy, celiac disease, Hashimoto's, multiple sclerosis, asthma, cystic fibrosis, and the list goes on and on. Most of these things are actually a consequence of what we absorb and eat and drink through our life. Therefore, there is opportunity to avoid these things in our individual lives. What's wrong with this picture? Well, actually everything. But even if you can look in beyond that, back in the 1930s, with the adoption of NPK fertiliser, especially ammonia nitrogen fertilisers, what we're able to do is increase crop production. But if you have a look here, there's actually elements or nutrients on the periodic table where basically the nutrients in our food has collapsed since the 1930s when NPK became widely available. At the same time, and again heading in exactly the wrong direction, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, various metals, etc., plastics, have all increased dramatically in terms of their commonality in the environment, and that's coming in through our food. So from a human viability point of view, this is all wrong. So just to sort of dumb that down a little bit, I saw this slide last week. Basically, an apple in 1950 would contain 4.3 milligrams of iron. Small piece of trivia. In 1998, the same apple would contain 0.18 milligrams of iron. So you might have heard of some people, friends, family, who might be iron deficient or deficient in other metals and minerals. Basically, you've got to eat 26 apples today. Well, actually, the number's actually much worse now. It's closer to 50, I believe. You actually need to eat so many more apples to get the same amount of iron or that nutrient kick in the food that we're eating. So this is the effect of our agricultural practices, which I really haven't heard too many people talk about this. So the nutrient decline is really a significant trend. If we have a look on the other side, perhaps a more positive perspective on it, the supplements market, which is vitamins, minerals, etc. In the USA alone, that's grown to $36 billion odd from $16 or $17 billion in 2000. What I also find really interesting with this chart, and maybe there's someone in the audience who knows of another chart like this, but over that period of time, the last 17 years, I actually can't see the GFC or a downtrend or a downturn expressed in that chart, 2008, 2009. Every other chart I've seen on any economic indicator or commodity or whatever, you'll see a drop, normally in that 2007, 2008 period. But not in supplements. People are self-supplementing. They're actually searching for answers. And we think this is a critical opportunity, certainly for myself as the Managing Director and an investor in this company. So, relentless and positive growth. Now, I did mention there was some not so good news. I find it fascinating when I looked up the stats that with the Gallipoli campaign going back 100 years ago, in fact, only 17% of all military servicemen who went and attended Gallipoli actually died. And yet today, we're trending very close to 95% mortality rate due to chronic illness. And yet no one's really talking about this. I find that quite surprising and at the same time quite disturbing. So the sad thing is to think then, well, think of 19 people in and around you, or look around you now, and out of the 20 people, 1 or 2 of us will actually get to die of old age. The rest of us will die from chronic illness and related complications. And I've certainly seen that expressed in my family. So what's going on? Just a bit of a cartoon, but there's 141 million chemicals now registered for use. So 200 years ago, there was basically no chemicals registered for usage. And interesting in our society, of course, with obesity and the epidemic of diabetes, etc., there's been a lot of emphasis on counting calories, which is great. I mean, we are eating too many calories and not enough nutrients. But it's also more disturbing, perhaps, is we're not counting the chemicals that we eat. And why not? Well, I don't know about you, but I can't read font 4 on the labelling on most of our food in the grocery store. It's such small, fine print, and it's a code, of course, etc., etc. And sometimes they're not even complete. The Dirty Dozen, the Clean 15, I love that. It's just a cartoon, but the Environmental Work Group out of the US published this. It's a not-for-profit. And the Dirty Dozen is reflecting what they measure has the most pesticide, herbicide and fungicide, which is on your food. So even when we try to do the right thing, sometimes it doesn't work so well for us because of what's actually entrained in the food. So for myself, I've started making more of a personal choice. Clean 15 I'll buy at Coles or Woolies. The Dirty Dozen, though, I'm a lot more careful about what I buy from my family. So a good business provides solutions. Well, we actually provide a lot of solutions in this business because of the underlying issues regarding our health and nutrition and the food we eat. And we're solving many problems in building better cells. So the good news is once we're aware of these issues, then we have the choice of doing something about them. I actually found it quite motivational to have the knowledge. When I was told some stories 10, 20 years ago, I simply didn't believe it. Now I've seen the science and the evidence, the research, the reports produced, and it's actually had quite a profound effect on the way I think about food and so on. So we've set up BetterCells to really help everyone access this kind of knowledge, which I've been very lucky to almost stumble onto 2 years ago when I attend some of the trade shows. So BetterCells, what's in it for me? Well, purchase test kits, find out what's going on. We've got a number of test kits listed on the site now, and we're hoping to expand and increase that range of test kits. So collect data, find out what's actually happening. We actually do have a little oligo scan unit, metals and minerals, sitting on our table. Everyone, please, you're welcome to come around and see us and get your hand scan and see just what's happening with a very simple, short, painless test. We're also very fortunate today to have Kim Rumble, who's a practitioner here in Sydney. She's a compounding pharmacist by trade, has been for many decades, a great expert, has great knowledge, and I always enjoy listening and hearing what Kim's got to say, and also seeing the surprise on some of my friends' faces when they get their results. So from a solution point of view, from a practitioner, well, one of the great things with having an online system is, of course, you can serve remotely. So, of course, in Australia, we still do have a large remote population. But also there's experts in the UK and the US, of course, which it's expensive to attend physically, so being online. It also gives 24/7 access. And from a practitioner point of view, one of our offerings is effectively you can reduce your dependence on bricks and mortar. When you set up a practice, you normally have to rent a premise. It might be a 3 or 5 year lease. Then you have to hire a secretary. So that gets a fairly costly exercise before you actually have your first customer and your first revenue from a business point of view. So we really are taking advantage of the online environment with BetterCells. The chronic illness market, just to give you some shapes and figures, I did touch on a few earlier on, but there's 26,000 functional practitioners in the USA. There's actually 6,000 functional practitioners in Australia, which again I was very surprised because 2 years ago I'd never heard about them. I did mention the spend figures, and The demand growth is strong. It's 5 to 9% per annum demand growth in services, goods, supplements, etc., no matter where you look. We've set up a scientific panel. For some of you who know me, of course, I've got a background more in geology and mining. I've actually found it fascinating for the first time in my life to actually have a look under my own skin and see what metals I'm walking around with under my own skin. And we've been building our scientific panel. These are the people that keep us honest, and they effectively filter a lot of the noise. For any of you who search, online or through Instagram or Facebook, there's a lot of rubbish, basically, in terms of quality of information. So we're providing a filter and a quality control, if you like, as we build this company and build our brand. How do we make money for shareholders? Well, that's important. Well, there's online consults, so you can talk to a practitioner for a few minutes. You can talk online. What's the advantage of that? Well, I don't know about you, but I've certainly travelled an hour in traffic, got to a practitioner, then had to sit in the office there for half an hour waiting for the practitioner. And then I get 5 minutes with them, I get the bill, and then I walk out. And it's like, well, that's taken me a week or 2 weeks, plus all the inconvenience of actually going there. I just needed to ask 2 questions, share some information or test results online, and all you need to do is just tell me what I need to do and get me sorted out and get me on my way. In terms of the future, because of the variety of tests that are available now, which extend well beyond the normal scope of, let's say, normal medical services that certainly I grew up with, microbiome, DNA, etc. All of that data we're storing securely in the cloud, so the only people who can access it are the individuals who paid for it, so it's your data. And then, of course, the consultant or the expert that you wish to share that data with because you want to get somewhere in terms of your results. What that effectively does then is we're building a multiple database that includes all the different data points in one site, which very much looking forwards next year to designing some artificial intelligence around that to start to look for correlations between DNA SNPs that are currently have no known sort of application or usage, and what that actually means from a nutritional status and a disease status for an individual and, of course, the family involved. So the big new data opportunity, just to touch on a few things, microbiome is a really exciting new field of science which is just growing exponentially. Food and chemical sensitivities, a wonderful starting point because we're all sensitive to different things. Sensitivity, you consume or get exposed to something, your white blood cells, your autoimmune system switches on. White blood cell autoimmune system is supposed to switch on when you've got a disease, like a pathogenic disease. And then, of course, 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, once a disease is born, the white blood cells and the autoimmune system is supposed to switch off. What we're not designed as human beings to have is our autoimmune system switched on the day we're born, and it switches off the day we die. There's a concept called friendly fire in the autoimmune system, and sometimes that friendly fire can get despicably hospitable in terms of your own health and wellness. It's actually your own autoimmune system that can actually cause your death as opposed to the underlying issue. So DNA, of course, reasonably well understood and also reasonably well misunderstood. Metals and minerals, the one I mentioned, that we've actually got a unit scanner there. And there's a whole variety of new tests available, including, for example, getting glyphosate or Roundup testing done, because we've all been pretty much exposed to Roundup. It's Monsanto's lead product, of course, in terms of killing weeds. Unfortunately, the toxic effect is not restricted to weeds. Microbiome, just to highlight, there's some activity there. Not much in the public market yet. I haven't seen too much in terms of share markets, but there's been a number of raisings, especially in the US and Europe, to really fund and accelerate microbiome testing, microbiome understanding. And we've got a couple of terrific microbiome labs here in Australia, particularly one in Melbourne and one in Brisbane that we're familiar with. And the microbiome, for those of you who are familiar, I apologise in advance, but just to be clear, when I went to university and did a couple of years of zoology and chemistry before I sort of branched off into geology, we were taught that there were basically 5 bugs in your gut. One was E. coli or Escherichia coli. The other one was Montezuma's Revenge if you went to Mexico and ate or drank the water. The other one was Barley Belly if you went to Bali, and the other one was Delhi Belly if you went to India. Actually, it turns out there's not 5, and then the other one's Salmonella if you have a bad meal at a restaurant or whatever. There's actually not 5 bug species in our gut. There's about 43,000 have been identified species and genera, let alone variations within species. And out of that almost rainforest of microbes that live in our gut, our actual health and wellness, mental and physical, is completely dependent on the activity of those microbes doing what they do, processing food, nutrients, producing metabolites, which are absorbed through our gut wall and then enter our bloodstream, and off we go. And that's what builds better cells, better people. If you interfere with that or diminish or damage that rainforest of microbes that live in your gut, which antibiotics, of course, the job of an antibiotic is to kill bacteria, you take a hit. And for one, again, I had no appreciation that I really need to take probiotics and prebiotics after having amoxicillin or any sort of antibiotic for any purpose. And the same goes for the kids and the family. So microbiome, I think we'll see and hear a lot more about that moving forwards from an investment point of view. In terms of BetterCells, back to us. Apologies for the small charts on the right-hand side there, but we really only started about 6 weeks ago, and we're tweaking and improving our systems daily. And so our focus is really on revenue growth, client acquisition or new customers, and increasing and encouraging practitioners to be on board. We started off beta testing and prototyping in Perth and Sydney, and now we're expanding across the Pacific shortly, and then building on that moving forwards in the US and then onto Europe and so on. So now for some good news. One of the things that I walk to, especially with a lot of my friends, is, well, I don't want to get tested because I don't want to know the bad news. And that's almost been a universal response with a lot of friends and people that I've talked to over the last year or so on this. However, the good news is actually these things are what we've eaten and accumulated in our lives already as we sit here today. But we're sort of flying blind or driving blind. We actually don't know what's in us that then needs to be either removed, or we don't know what's missing. So that's actually a screenshot of my app on my results that came out the other week. And iodine for me is extremely low, and amazingly enough, most men that we've tested in Australia share similar. My mercury is very high, and again, because of mercury amalgams or exposure in past life. For me, lead was actually pretty good, but I've got a lot of friends with lead. So what you can do then is, there's the news, and relatively low cost. You can do things like take iodine supplements and so on based on your actual individual results. So you're not shooting blind, you're not wasting money, you're actually now correcting the system and countering that nutrient deficiency. So ladies and gentlemen, Jerry, thank you very much.
Thank you.